All right, welcome in. It's the Ground Puck Podcast. Curtis Crabtree, Fox 13, Tim Booth, Seattle Times, all brought to you by Georgetown Brewery. Locally owned and operated. Two diehard Huskies, Manny and Roger. They've been pouring the best local craft beer for the past 23 years. Makers of Manny's Pale Ale, Bodie's Zaffa IPA, host of their favorite brews all around. Tap room is open 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week. Visit them at georgetownbeer.com. All right, well, how did everyone spend their bye week, huh? Everyone good? You get out and experience something fun? Curtis, what'd you do?
Yeah, I actually did an impromptu quick trip down to Dallas to go catch a Linkin Park concert since they're back and have a new lead singer and everything, and it was pretty cool. Never had a chance to see them before with Chester Bennington, and so I flew down and saw them now with Emily Armstrong at the Rangers ballpark, and yeah, it was a pretty good weekend. Got around to golfing down there, went and saw Dealey Plaza, and did a little quick trip and came on back. So yeah, it was a good little weekend.
Well, it's just great not to have kids, Tim. Just not have a family. All right. And again, I think I just never pictured you for a Linkin Park fan. I just it doesn't. I don't see it, but okay, I love it.
Yeah,
good for you.
Yeah, it was probably my favorite band through high school and all the way on up. So yeah, it's a good chance to go see them for sure.
Tim, you sounds like you did damage to your liver in Missoula, Montana.
Yeah, just a little bit. Still trying to fully recover from that experience. But see, mine was speaking of bands, the only time I'd ever been to Missoula before was for 2 Pearl Jam concerts. So I decided that I needed to actually go take in a football game in the land of Ryan Divish, and so flew over with some friends and went to the Montana UC Davis game, which kicked off at a lovely time of 8:20 p.m. Mountain Time on Saturday night. So it was nice and chilly by the time that game wrapped up. But then it was also this is what my excuse has been. It was also a scouting trip because next year the mighty Wildcats of Central Washington open the season against the Grizzlies of Montana. So I'm thinking my son and I might make the road trip over next year for that game. So it was a scouting trip.
Yeah, it's a great little football stadium.
It's great. It's awesome. Fantastic. We were in our good friend Ryan Divish got us tickets, obviously, and we were in the last row in the end zone, and it was still it was a great seat. It was a fantastic seat to try and watch the game from. So it was really
hooked you up there, huh? It really sounds like Divish has got a lot of pull back at the school that he used to be at, huh?
Going to Missoula with Ryan Divish is an experience because he literally knows everybody. He honestly could probably run for governor of Montana with the amount of people and the handshakes, the glad handing, the drinks he was being bought for people. It was, it's an experience to go to anywhere in Montana, but Missoula specifically with our friend, Mr. Divish.
Did you go to Bodegas?
We did not go to Bodegas. We went to Reds. We spent basically the entire night at Reds.
Okay. You never made it to the Ox? He didn't take you there?
No, we tried to go to the Mo Club, but it was packed, and so and some of those guys were there on Friday, so they may have hit a couple of those places on Friday before I got there. So
well, there we go. No Seahawks game to break down of what happened here. This past weekend, obviously, they had a bye. They'll get set to take on the 49ers. And, hey, look who's back. Christian McCaffrey's back just in time for the Seahawks and 49ers coming up this week. I think we just opened up the show this week just 9 games, I guess, is the halfway point, really, of the season. And Tim, I'll start with you. Just kind of a state of where the Seahawks are at right now. They're 4-5. They're 0-2 in the division. They're 1-4 in conference play. Through 9 games, the Seahawks are who are they?
They are a team that is still trying to figure out, I think, who they are. They're a team who I think gave a certain amount of not false hope, but just false impression of who they were by starting 3-0, which just ended up being the fortunate way the schedule was set up that allowed them to start that way. I think they're a team that when they avoid the self-inflicted mistakes, they can beat quality opponents like we saw with, the win over Atlanta, but they haven't yet proven themselves against any good competition this year, and that's shown the sort of the thin line that they're walking between being a team that can be successful and a team that, right now is 4-5 and in last place in the NFC West. Obviously, we've talked ad nauseum about the deficiencies that they have, but it kind of, you have rebuild up there on your little side thing about the menu about a question there, and it does kind of feel like they're in this tenuous sort of state of, is the season going to end up being 6-11 and they do need to go into a rebuild, or is this season going to end up being 9-8 and they there's a chance that they're in the race for a playoff spot until the last week of the season. I don't know which way I would lean right now. I think maybe I'd lean a little bit more toward the 6-11 spot. So based on what we've seen and what their schedule is upcoming. So they're just kind of like in this sort of limbo right now, I guess is maybe the best way to say it, of not sure which way they're going to end up going the rest of the season. And that's based off, those moments of good play and those moments of massive inconsistency we've seen so far.
Curtis, same question for you.
Yeah, I think they're a pretty good football team everywhere that isn't the line of scrimmage. And they've got a lot of talent on the roster. They do. But that line of scrimmage, at times on both sides of the football has really hurt them this year. They've gotten the defensive line cleaned up a little bit more with a couple guys back healthy, making a trade to add a guy in there in Roy Robertson Harris. But the offensive line is just the most obvious critical focal point of this team, and there's no escaping it. And if it was better, there's a pretty high ceiling for this roster, and maybe we see some changes as to what they're going to try to do there this week. I don't know. We'll have to see when they get back to work here exactly what's going to happen up front, and if they're going to make any personnel changes. If Abe Lucas's eventual return, assuming that happens, helps to get things smoothed out a little bit. But they really do have talent at every part of this roster except for the line of scrimmage. But with the offense, and even there's some talent there. Like Charles Cross, first round pick. Connor Williams has been a borderline Pro Bowler before. They've got some guys up there, that have done some things in the league and everything. But collectively right now, it's just the one thing that's really significantly holding them back.
Yeah, McDonald talked, last week just about. I think the quote was, Curtis, everything is on the table. How they're going to evaluate this football team and leading up to their game with San Francisco. What did you read into that when he was like, everything is on the table? And if everything is on the table, what changes could they make? Let's say, and let's stick with the offensive line first and foremost.
Well, the obvious one is Abe Lucas's return to the lineup at right tackle. That's, one that you would probably expect to see happen, assuming he's healthy enough to play here at some point in the coming short-term future. You could try to make a change at right guard. In a couple different ways you could try it. The just moving a right guard position spot, you could, if you feel like you want to try Jason Peters there, you could give him a chance at that spot off the practice squad. McClendon Curtis, same thing. You could give him a chance at guard, even though he's been more of a tackle for them with what they've done before. You could try that. The other, move that requires two moves would be to bump Connor Williams there, given his history of playing guard, and then put Oluwatimi at center and have him and Jalen Sundell handle the center spot with Connor Williams playing guard. That would be I think the two different ways you could try to adjust the right guard position. I would tend to think it's easier to make one swap than two, so I would tend to lean towards a Jason Peters and McClendon Curtis getting a chance there before I would think they would do the double swap to kind of try to find things to make it work. But coming off the bye, maybe they're able to give a little bit of a chance lead time to give that a run and do it the other way if they feel like that's their best option. We'll see. So those would be the ways I think you would do. I don't think you mess with Laken Tomlinson on the other side. He's not been, super high end, but I don't think he's been the biggest problem for them either. I think it's that right side of the offensive line that's truly the thing that's really, really holding them back.
And Tim, we're sitting here, going into week 10, week 11 of the season, and you're talking about, making some pretty drastic offensive line changes. I don't care who you are. You start getting into these discussions after 9 games into the season. Mm-hmm. Most everybody's going to know that whatever changes they make, they're probably not going to work because these are changes and additions and things you need to do in the offseason, not 9 games into the year.
Yeah. Although, the Abe Lucas, opportunity for him to come back. Obviously it's been based around injury versus, personnel decisions that you had in the off season. So that's, that's the one that you look at and go, okay, this guy, when he was healthy, was a dude. Like he played pretty dang well at that spot. And if you can get him back, maybe not right away to the level that he was, early, that first year of his career, you might be able to shore up one of your biggest deficiencies. And the piece with that is that if you're able to solidify that, if Abe is able to come in and not necessarily maybe lock down the spot, but be a significant upgrade from what you've had there, then you don't have to do things like have a tight end stay in and chip on, an edge rusher coming in, or you don't have to align your protection so that your running back that is staying in to help block has to worry about the right tackle. He might be able to help inside if, on the right guard, if Anthony Bradford is still there, or if Jason Peters step in, or whoever is holding out a spot. The trickle down effect might actually end up helping them in pass protection, maybe specifically, with some of the issues that they've had, allowing the rush to get there and affect Geno in the passing game. So, but again, that's all wait and see, because we haven't seen Abe Lucas out there in quite a long time. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like when he gets there.
Let's go there. You brought up the dreaded R word, and that R word is rebuild. I mean, they haven't had to do anything, in terms of a rebuild, right, Tim, since 2010, right? The first year that Carroll and Schneider took this squad over. They are 4-5. I don't know what they're closer to. To me, I would agree with you. They're closer to probably going 6-11. I think we did this exercise last week. I don't want to. If we did, I apologize. All right, it's been a long week and I'm sick. But they're not going to, most likely won't be favored in the remaining games that they have. I mean, maybe the Bears game now, because they're kind of falling apart. And who knew the Bears would fall apart with a bad offensive coordinator? Shocker. But, they're going to be underdogs in most all of their games. So, yeah, 6-11 seems probably more likely than not. The last time they were this bad, you got to go back to the last year there, Jim Moore, when they were 5-11. If they my point has been this, Tim, if they don't find a way to get out a win here, especially in the next three, right? And you got Niners, Cardinals, Jets, and I know how the Jets are playing, but you got to go back there. I guess I just ask, why would you not want to start going down that road of rebuilding? Because I would just ask anyone who was a staunch Seahawks supporter or would defend against the idea of it, Tim, would be how close are they? I mean, truly, how close are they to winning a championship? Because that's the ultimate goal, for most teams. But for this team, because they've set the bar so high for themselves, is to win a championship. So how much closer would they be to that in the offseason?
Well, I think, I'll take your question this way. Like, if they go 0-3 in these next three, then yeah, I mean, your season is essentially shot at that point, especially with who you have over the final month of the season. It's hard, I think, to do necessarily a rebuild during the season. There's certain spots that I think they could start moving in some younger guys if that was the route that they ended up wanting to go, and give them a little bit more run, a little bit more playing time. But again, this isn't like, this is the thing with a 53-man, roster or whatever, the 46 that you have active on game days. It's not like college. You can't just all of a sudden throw a whole ton of freshmen in there and give them their 4 games to avoid or to keep their red shirt so that they, have their eligibility and get their experience. Like, you still have to roll out your guys, you still have to roll out there Devin Witherspoon and Julian Love and Ernest Jones and all those guys, because you don't have that amount of depth. So, but the idea of a rebuild, I think, to Curtis's point, it's the line of scrimmage. Like, you rebuild the line of scrimmage. It's not so much that you have to rebuild the skill positions around them. It's not so much you have to rebuild a whole side of the ball. It's the line of scrimmage that you would have to rebuild. And whether they end up 6-11 or 9-8 or whatever the final number is this year, you're probably going to have to rebuild the line of scrimmage no matter what, this offseason. I think maybe that's the biggest thing we've learned in this first year under Mike Macdonald is it still revolves around the line of scrimmage. Pete Carroll could be the coach. Tom Cable could be the offensive line coach.
Yes, bring him back.
Scott Huff could be the offensive line coach. Whoever is in that position, whoever is running this team, it still revolves around the line of scrimmage, and that's where, when we talk about rebuild, everything else is probably just moving a little chess piece here or there. to change around a position or to reallocate funds or whatever. With the rest of the team, the line of scrimmage is the place where I think when we're talking rebuild, that's where it's going to be.
And Curtis, I mean, I agree with what you said. I mean, really, you look at the other pieces on the football team, and they are, for all intents and purposes, a good team. I mean, they've got skill position players that the other teams would envy, but it does start with that offensive line. But how quickly, I guess I'd ask you, can you turn around that offensive line to get you back to championship expectations, and can you do so with the amount of money that you've got locked up in guys next season? You don't have a lot of money already, and I know you can manipulate the salary cap and do a bunch of different things and all that, but they need at least, I mean, depending on where Lucas is, let's just say Lucas is healthy, you're talking 3/5 of your offensive line need to be upgraded. Can you do that in one offseason?
You can do a chunk of that in one off season, but you do have to, use the resources to do it. And I guess my take on it would be define rebuild. Like, to what extent are we talking here? Because I think the idea of like tanking has become somewhat romanticized and wanting to do that. And in the NFL, that can lead to a very long stint in the basement of the league. I mean, look at the teams who are the worst in the league right now and think of how long that they've been in the bottom third of the league. The Giants, Jaguars, Browns, Titans, Raiders, Dolphins, Jets. Those are all teams that have been like perennially in the top 10 of the draft because they've, tried to find it and rebuild by being in the top 10, and they haven't been able to do it because there's so many places on a roster you have to fill out to an adequate level to be able to build a team that's any good. So, I don't think it's a team you need to strip down to the studs and rebuild from the floor up, but they think they're definitely in need of some areas that they need to address. And you can look at it and say, the luxury of having 3 really good receivers probably can't continue for, a long time into the future. Other spots on a line that they've, given a lot of money to, you probably can't, linebacker through the years has been one, not so much at the current moment here, but through the years it has been because of Wagner and KJ Wright and so forth. And they're going to have to find a different way to calibrate the roster to make it be that championship competing roster again, because I know we keep coming back to it. Geno Smith's having a pretty dang good year given the circumstances he's playing with, and they still have lost, 5 of 6.
Right.
To be where they're at. So it's not been the quarterback play that's held them back. It's been that line of scrimmage.
Well, I guess I would just ask this. Yeah, I mean, in terms of a rebuild, and again, I know that there's this narrative that, hey, this team doesn't rebuild. They reload. Well, I mean, they have. I mean, we just detailed when they had a rebuild. They did a massive roster construction when they first got the job. It's just been, because they've been relevant for the last 14, 15 years. They've been a good football team, so they haven't had to really strip it down. I think when you look at it, I would just say that they're going to go into an offseason. Let's say Tim and I are right. And generally, Tim and I are right about a lot of stuff, Curtis, okay? and let's say they finish 6-11. And I agree with you. I think there's a lot of games this year that could have gone differently for them. I mean, honestly, that they could be staring at a season that was 10-7 easily. But I would just say with how problematic it is on the offensive line, like how close are they to actually winning it? And then I would say, okay, do you go into an offseason where you commit a lot of money potentially to DK Metcalf? I mean, a lot. I mean, he's going to want $140+ million, probably about $100 million guaranteed. Now, I'm a big fan of DK Metcalf. They've been searching for this guy forever. They finally found it. I found someone like him who's a dominant wide receiver. But there comes a cost of you can't pay everyone, especially in the NFL. Okay, so if you do have a large amount of your cap or a contract that goes to him, you have to make a decision. If you bring him back, you've most likely at that point you've got to bring back Smith at some point. Now, what does Geno Smith deal look like? He's gonna want to be paid like an upper tier quarterback, and he's gonna go to him and say, "Listen, look at these numbers. I'm one of the best quarterbacks in the league." He believes he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and so what does that look like now? Because now you're starting to chew up a lot of money in 2 players, which again. they're very good players, but if there's no offensive line to block, what's the benefit, Curtis, of spending that much money in two skill position players if still the root of the problem is you can't block anyone?
Yeah, that is the question, and I do think it's legitimate to look at DK Metcalf's future in that way. Not necessarily for the trade deadline that just passed, because it doesn't shock me that they didn't move him right now. But if you don't think that that's a question they're going to have to wrestle with come March, like that's absolutely one, because that's the biggest thing I think you have to look at there for a player that is looking at a contract, what, $30 million a year, somewhere in that ballpark, and for I don't know that they're close enough to have that luxury right now to pay a wide receiver that, given where they're at. And then the Geno Smith contract part of it is certainly up for grabs, because I think Geno Smith is plenty good enough as a quarterback, but it's the asset at this point when he's on the wrong side of 30 years old that does make the discussion about whether he continues as a quarterback a question, depending on how close you feel like they are. So that part of it, I do think, is a legitimate discussion to have for sure. I just don't, when we talk about rebuild, like I said, I think there's this notion that you have to tear everything down, trade everything off, and start from ground zero again. And I don't think that that's where they're at, but they're definitely in a circumstance where they're going to have to look to refocus what they're doing, what is the best path forward for the future, and figure it out. Because, I mean, at least when they did it under Pete Carroll when he first came in, that team had won 9 games in 2 years. Like that, there was a reason that they were going to do that at that point in time, given the last year of Holmgren and the only year of Jim Mora there. This team isn't that yet, and I think it's got plenty of talent on it across the roster, but there are some areas there because of the circumstance that you are going to have to make some decisions on.
Yeah, because, I mean, Tim, you look at some of the cap hits next season. Now, I think we all agree that, if they decide to do something with Geno, he's not going to certainly play on that cap hit. That cap hit's $38 million next season. Then you got DK at 31. We'll see if they do something with it in the offseason. But you got Tyler Lockett, $30 million. Leonard Williams at $29 million. Draymond Jones at $25. Nwosu at $21. Noah Fant has got a cap hit next season of $13 million. I mean, there is, unless they get real creative and things they can do, and again, somebody find a capologist, they can get all creative with the salary cap. But the point is just this: it does illustrate where they don't. It's be hard for them to go out and, like, whatever free agents on the market, Tim, as an offensive lineman, and go spend a bunch of money, because they really at this point don't have the resources. And, would a player, if they decided to move on in the offseason with the trade, bring back enough draft capital to where they could upgrade it and look at the future of upgrading that offensive line? Because the other thing with the quarterback situation is this: he's played very good, but he's 35. And, the one, I think, regret that they have, and I guess maybe, Tim, miscalculation, is when they traded Russell Wilson, which was a great trade, there was never an answer for post-Russell. Like, they still have yet to solve that. Maybe they thought it was Drew Lock, but it wasn't Drew Lock. Maybe they think it's Sam Howell, but I don't know. You guys were at training camp. You tell me if there's something there with Sam Howell. I mean, that still remains the biggest question mark for them besides the offensive line is, I mean, you do need a quarterback to really, really win in this league, and most likely like an elite quarterback.
It's kind of like, and this is no disrespect to Geno, because I think if you go back, 2 years ago, Geno's played beyond what I think anybody thought was going to be the case when he stepped in for Russell. But it's this constant game of kicking the can down the road. Right. And it's like, oh, we'll deal with the quarterback later. We'll deal with the quarterback later. And it's going to be, we're going to bring Drew Lock in, and maybe he's going to be the guy. And now we're bringing in Sam Howell, and maybe he's going to be the guy. The one thing with Geno and his age is that, yes, he is 35, but when you don't play for however many years it was that he really didn't play, in essence, your football age is in theory, younger than what that is. Obviously, over time, age and skill are going to start to diminish, or your skills are going to start to diminish a little bit as you get older, and eventually that's going to catch up with you. But I think they look at Geno as being a young, 35 for what it is. But to your point, yeah, do you feel like you can win a championship with Geno, considering the circumstances that are around him? And are you going to commit a $38 million cap hit to him next year? Are you going to commit a $30 million cap hit to Tyler Lockett for next year. I mean, I think I pulled up over the cap while you guys were talking. I mean, they've got 43 contracts committed for next year, and they're already almost $5 million over the cap. What the projected cap is going to be for next year. They've got some math that they have to figure out along with the deficiencies that they have, and it kind of goes back to, you can't miss in the draft. You can't miss while these guys are cheap, and whether it's Christian Haynes this year, or Abe Lucas with his injuries that he's had, or Anthony Bradford just not being the guy that they thought he was going to be. Like, when we talk about these issues with the line of scrimmage, it can all kind of revolve back to, they've missed on guys in the draft. They've tried to invest draft capital in some of these guys when you can put together a unit that's cheap, and it hasn't worked out for whatever the reason it might be. And so then when you do allocate your money in other ways to the skill position, to the stars of the team, and then you have these deficiencies on the line of scrimmage, it just amplifies itself even more, that now, I need to go get myself a right guard, or I need to go get myself an elite center, and I don't have the assets available because it's all tied up in our skill position guys, or our star players, in essence, because we've missed in the draft and haven't gotten those guys when they are cheap and are able to create a roster that's financially manageable, more or less. So it's a great asset allocation question for this team going into the offseason. Where do you need to put your money? Where do you need to put your resources to try and put this thing together so that it's better than what it's been this year? And it might be a total strip down, or it might be the little tweaks that Curtis is talking about, but there are some massive financial questions that this team will have.
Because what they're going to find themselves, Curtis, if they this is, I think, the worry, right, for any organization, is you're stuck in the middle, right? 9-8, 10-7, right in there. It's like, that is where you're just good enough. You're good enough to maybe get in the playoffs. You lose in the wild card, but I mean, that's not their goal, right? That's their goal is to win the division and win another Lombardi Trophy, right? That's everyone's goal. Some teams you believe, and other teams like Jacksonville you don't believe. But I mean, it's like that's the goal for most of the teams. So it's a real conundrum for them in the offseason. I think for John Schneider. I'm just curious, does John Schneider have, I would think so, from ownership, does he have enough confidence? Does the ownership have enough confidence in him if he were to go to them and say, listen, I think we got to make some drastic moves here. I think we got to rip this down a little bit. Start not completely start over, but we need to get some more draft capital. We need to build it up. Are you comfortable with us doing that? Is Mike McDonald comfortable doing that?
Well, I think given the reins to hire a new head coach, he's got some runway to make some changes for a path forward as well to pair with that. But yeah, as you mentioned, I would assume that Draymond Jones and Noah Fant are Tyler Lockett, those are contracts that aren't going to be tenable for next year. So they're either going to be gone, or they're going to have to be extensions and reworked, or circumstances like that. I just do want to caution fans that I think they forget what it's like to have a bad quarterback. It's been a very, very long time since the Seahawks have had a bad quarterback. You probably have to go back to the Trent Dilfer, Matt Hasselbeck year, where the quarterback play has been extremely bad for their starting quarterback. Even the year Tavares started in 2011, he wasn't great, but he was adequate as a quarterback. It's been a long time since they've had the position be like a net negative by an extremely long point for a starting quarterback. And I'm not saying Sam Howell's definitely going to be that or anything, but it is the question you have to ask yourself, because when you have a team that does not have a quarterback at the NFL level, it's miserable. It's absolutely miserable. And then you're constantly trying to find one. And I mean, you think of how long Detroit was in the cellar before Jared Goff came along, right, and they got a front office that was competent. You can be stuck down there for a very long time. The Seahawks themselves were in that position for an exceptionally long time. So yeah, there are reasons to make a decision like that and go that direction, but you have to realize that there can be consequences if it doesn't go right for you, where you can end up being a team that's in the basement for a long, long time if you don't make those right calls as well. So it's not a flippant call here to just say, okay, we'll move on from Geno, move on from this, and start from the bottom up again, because it's not always that easy. Finding that quarterback can be a tough part, and they've kind of found out that they kind of lucked into another really good one here with Geno for the last couple of years. But they are at a crossroads a little bit with their roster construction and what they're going to do on that front moving forward for sure.
That's a bye week edition of the Ground Puck Podcast is in the books with Curtis Crabtree at Fox 13. Curtis, tell everybody where you can find all your work.
Yeah, fox13seattle.com and on my Twitter account, Curtis_Crabtree.
And Tim Booth, who is now, of course, at the Seattle Times. Tim, give them all the details where they can find your work.
SeattleTimes.com. I'm on X. I'm starting to try out Blue Sky. It's all by Tim Booth on those platforms. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, it's all brought to you by Georgetown Brewery, locally owned and operated by two diehard Huskies, Manny and Roger. Been pouring the best local craft beer past 23 years. Makers of Manny's Pale Ale, Bodie's Alpha IPA, host of your other favorite beers. Tap room open 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week. Visit them at georgetownbeer.com. You can find this episode up on YouTube. Just search Puck Sports. Please subscribe. Also, later on the podcast, and later, if you're listening to it later, you already know. Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast, and of course, up at pucksports.com. Thanks, boys. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Puck.
Good luck.